Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit,
the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes.
Okay, now let's get on with the show.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Alternative Exit. So for today, I've been very fortunate to meet our next guest and watch him in action at the Oxford Symposium on Employee Ownership. And in that short time, I was left deeply inspired and, if I'm honest, slightly a bit jealous of his ability to articulate the transformative impact of employee ownership and what's required to be able to make it successful. So Campbell Mcdonald, he brings a rare breadth of experience to the conversation, spanning entrepreneurship, government, higher education, consulting, and even journalism. He's a passionate and tireless advocate for employee ownership and currently wears many hats, like from MD to sort of one of the leading UK consultancies, the Eternal Business, chief executive of a think tank, Ownership Work, independent trustees of quite a few companies, and look, in his spare time, he's an executive fellow at the Ruskin University, sort of talking about all things employee ownership. So Campbell, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to see you again. Very generous introduction. Very grateful. Thank you.
You say generous, but you have had a long and storied career. I mean, the last 14 years seems to have been really dedicated towards employee ownership and helping the companies to thrive and helping the people to thrive within that space. I mean, what initially drove you towards employee ownership trust and the employee ownership movement?
I had been a civil servant. I've been a journalist and then I've been a civil servant running the press office and the cabinet office for a number of years. And I needed to leave. I needed to go find a job that paid me a bit more, if I'm really honest, like family needs, 2 kids. And I needed a job that paid me a bit more. And I joined a consultancy. And it was just after the financial crash. It was right at the end of 2008. And amazingly, through no intent of my own, the main first client I was given was John Lewis Partnership. So I had the chance to spend a couple of years as the kind of principal public affairs advisor to the board of that business, right at a time where everybody was interested in, a different way of doing business. We'd seen the vulnerabilities created by the financial crash. Government was asking questions about how do we get a more diverse economy? And suddenly, the door was open. And so working with them was incredibly inspiring, as you would imagine. And then I started working with the EOA, the Employee Ownership Association. I started working with some of the early public sector kind of big health spin-outs in this space. And I just found a group of incredibly inspiring people and a model that felt really different and really interesting. And after a couple of years, I just went, I got to work in this sector. I need to be in this and doing this. And I, again, was really lucky and had a chance to join what was called Baxi Partnership and had been a funding buyouts. And they wanted to create a consultancy. And from that, we created what is now Baxendale. So that was a really, really exciting time and a really exciting experience. And that's where I first came across it and fell in love with it. The Stockholm syndrome, I guess.
It's amazing how many people it's amazing the huge impact of John Lewis Partnership and the legacy it's given over there in the UK. So many people I seem to speak to in the space have been touched by it.
So I think this is probably apocryphal, but I'm pretty sure John Betjeman is kind of cited as saying, if the bomb drops, I'm going to John Lewis because nothing very bad ever happens in a John Lewis, right? So there is something kind of slightly in the culture about the experience, the feeling of safety, the feeling of kind of care and nurture that was always the hallmark of your customer experience of being in a John Lewis. And actually, if you talk to a lot of people, and it's not perfect, right? Like they understand that they have the same challenges with kind of team motivation and engagement and so on that everybody else does. But when you talk to someone who gets it and loves it, it's infectious. And that's a lot of what we try to kind of support and create, businesses moving into the model now of any size to do. Because it's not easy. It's not automatic. It doesn't just happen because you put a trust in place, right? So for that reason, I think they continue to inspire.
Okay. Now, we'll probably dive into a little bit more of, I guess, the sort of the transactional elements of what happens pre and post a little bit later in this call. But I'd love to get an understanding of what I mean in these 14 years. What are some of the impacts that you've seen, like for workers, for owners who are transitioning, and even for communities with regards to the impact of positive employee ownership?
Anecdotally, I've seen some amazing stuff, right? So some really powerful outcomes. You go visit an organization called Gripple. They've had a direct ownership model actually, but they've been in it for such a long time. But some of the kind of incredible personal outcomes that people in that business have seen off the back of being owners in their business are hugely powerful. When you think about the trust model, obviously the EOT has only existed since 2014, and there's a little lag factor there, right? So the numbers adopting that trust kind of hockey sticked, so they were quite slow on uptake, and then really took off kind of 2018, 2019. And then the average time for a full payout is about 5 to 7 years. So we're sort of storing up, I think, this big explosion in really, really powerful kind of return on that trust model to regular beneficiaries, regular employees in EOT-owned businesses, because when the people in the sector kind of sometimes call it financial freedom day, right? But when those deferred considerations are paid off, and there's just that extra chunk of cash for the business to do something with every year, I think we will really start to see an explosion. So look, that's kind of one answer. Second answer, hard not to refer to the data that we gathered as a part of the 2023 knowledge program. So as you know, Andy, because you're going to be there, the EOA's national conference is kind of happening, right around now. And, we are going to stand up in front of some groups of people. You're going to talk to some people. And actually, when I stand up, I'm going to kind of make this plea, right? Which I'm going to say, look, the reason I became fixated in about 2017 on data, on evidence, on proof of the impact of the model was because I had been invited out to Dublin by the Irish ProShare Association to address a conference. And I was running Baxendale at the time, and there was kind of pressure on, the margins were tight, and I was going off to kind of bring back some new opportunities. And I kind of turned up in the very swish kind of Google headquarters in Dublin, and confidently kind of marched out on stage and gave my best pitch for why employee ownership, broad-based employee ownership was the best thing since the invention of Guinness. And I got completely floored because a guy from the floor just shouted, "Prove it!" And I was kind of like, and so I started kind of reaching for those anecdotes, right, and citing John Lewis and others. And he was just like, I won't do the accent, but he was just like, look, we've all got stories. I don't need stories. I want facts. How do I know that if I introduce this is going to excite all my people and drive performance? And I couldn't answer his question. And I wanted the floor to swallow me up. And I was kind of like, right, I will not be in this situation again. So kind of ever since then, just became a little obsessive with, we need this data. And it really was not then until 2023, part-time chief executive ownership at work, that research charity, little tiny thing. And with the help of the EOA, we raised the money and we did this knowledge program. We contrasted 10% of the sector, representative sample with a control group twice as large. We had external researchers help us do it, so we weren't marking our own homework. And it came back with this really powerful set of outcomes. Impacts at the level of individuals tend to receive twice as much in terms of cash or bonus or dividend. Businesses tending to invest way more in terms of health and well-being compared to non-employee owned businesses. Similar on training and investment in skills. Tended to pay a fairer basic wage. So there was a set of stuff happening at the level of individuals. And then we tracked it, and we had a guy who'd been in the treasury for a decade, and was now out. And we said to him, look, we need treasury quality data on this. We need quant, right? We've got rich qual, we need quant. And he did a productivity model for us that the treasury looked at and went, okay, we accept that. And it showed an 8 to 12% productivity uplift, when you compare employee owners at the level of individuals to non-employee owners. Now, even with some optimism bias, and we really built the research to counter against that. That says there are powerful impacts for individuals, and there's an even more powerful impact for a company if you can switch it on. How you switch it on, that is the next big challenge. That is right. Like a small group of us, we think based on practice, we know what that is, but it is not automatic and it's hard to do. And we don't actually have the data on kind of what happens in the black box. You introduce EO, you've got a company, some of them fly, it's amazing, and some kind of totter along and it doesn't really fire. And actually, we really need to understand what's happening in that black box. Sorry, long answer.
No, man. I love it as the passion comes through and that sort of need for data. I mean, because when a lot of people think about the space, they can understand it. Like they can, so yeah, I can see how this is going to be better. I mean, and I love that challenge from whoever it was at Dublin. Have you been able to find them and send them the data from the?
No, I never. They were sort of in the dark near the back, but I'm haunted by the voice. And maybe they'll come up to me one day. Who knows? It was not fun. It was not a fun experience at the time.
Oh, look, it's never nice, but it's formative, right? It's obviously had a big impact. Which is great. Coming out of in that other organisation you're associated with, at Rutgers, I mean, they do talk about what happens, or like what are the core elements that need to happen within that black box to make these companies successful, post-transaction. And I mean, you've obviously helped a lot of companies as well. So, I mean, what do you see as some of the core elements that need to be in place for a company to thrive in an EO model?
Really good question. Let me just say how much I respect and love the guys at Rutgers. Joseph Blasi is definitely a huge hero. Doug Cruz, Andrew Sharp, they're doing amazing work in this space. To be fair to us, so we put those guys around the knowledge program when we designed it. So because they just had such a better data set than we did a few years ago, and Joseph and Doug have been really supportive since. And then they have actually recently published a piece of research themselves. And Joseph, I hope you won't mind me saying this, sort of reached out and said, look, I've always felt like your findings were just so good. Like kind of was there something, was there an optimism bias in there? And he said, look, ours look the same. We've done some of the same. We've looked for some of the same kind of points that you have, and ours looks the same. So that gives me confidence in our data, renewed confidence in our data. So look, love the guys at Rutgers, love what they're doing. I actually believe, and I may be wrong, but I think we both have the same ambition, right? Which is really to create ultimately the equivalent of a kind of an RCT, right? Like a randomized control trial, the kind of things you do for medical devices, right? But where you literally have, a group of companies as a group of companies just chugging along, a group of kind of really matched companies as they enter the model, no intervention, and then a third group where there's an intervention, and you measure the difference in the impact of the intervention, right? And you start to really prove out whether, yes, we see the change that happens, EO versus non-EO, but then actually when we intervene and we do these certain management practices, it really fires. So that's the dream right? Like that's what I'd love to be able to do. Love to do it with those guys, in fact. But to your question, what is it? Like, what is the stuff based on the work I've done? So the second thing we did in the knowledge program was we interviewed the leaders of half of our cohort of employee-owned businesses, so 5% at that point of people running EO businesses in the UK. And we asked them, what are the management practices that you are doing that you believe is driving impact from the model? So what are you doing in the name of ownership? And we had, again, an independent firm do those interviews for us and capture it. They produced a set of headings, which were incredibly enlightening. And then what we've done since is a small group of us who worked with the EOA, and we created something called the Great EO Framework. I'm doing this because it's a pyramid, but it has four kind of bigger headings and 12 areas of practice. And then look, what we'll talk about at conference a bit is something that a handful of us, myself and a lady called Deb Oxley, who used to run the EOA, and a guy called Adam Campbell, who runs an organization called Telos Partners, have spent a couple of years now really trying to create a kind of diagnostic or a health check that uses best practice and says, right, if these are 12 areas of common management practice, how do you tell whether you're doing them right? So that whole process, Andy, has really sharpened my view of what you need to do to switch on the model. And if you wanted me to distill it to two things, I would say that as the operating board of an employee-owned business, you need to be able to answer two questions very clearly. What are the 2 to 3 points of ownership difference that everyone in our business value? Right? You stop anyone in the business tomorrow and you say, what do you get out of being an owner? And they would say, I get this and this, and I love that. Right? Because I don't think I would get that somewhere else. So it's different, right? It's not identical for every firm. And that's the trick. You've got to work out, and just while we're in this, just a slight sideline on this point, I have loads of conversations with really well-run businesses, right? Who do lots of, I guess, what a lot of people think of as core practice, right? Before they move into the model, they were sharing information. They were listening to voice. They were maybe doing a profit share. And they come in, and then 2 years in, they're like, oh, people are like, well, it's just what it was anyway, right? And it's like this kind of like good company penalty or something, because like, oh, you were doing really well and doing this good stuff. And now people are like, well, ownership makes no difference. We had this before. And the point is just, you've got to be even more creative in that situation, right? You've got to really, really hone in on what are your points of ownership difference. So that's question one. Question two is,
well, mate, just before we get into question two,
come on.
That example that you talked about there, that's the fourth type of company that I want to have in your RCT, in that random control trial, because that's something that I hear all the time. Like, is that people sort of push back on ownership because they're going, hey, look, we run a great company. Our team they feel connected with the mission. They feel driven to do that, and still. We don't need to give them ownership to have a great culture that's sort of engaged and driven. I mean, what you talked about, sort of those points of ownership that comes out of those companies. I mean, what do you hear that comes out of those companies that those people say that, hey, look, these are the two or three things I really value?
Look, there is no doubt, right? Like, reward is not everything, right? Money is not everything. We know that, right? Like, years and years of surveys that tell us, when you ask people, they say, well, yeah, I need to get paid, but I turn up at work because I care about what I do, or I love the place that I work. I love the team. I love the values that my organization stands for. But the minute there's a bonus in play, right, then like all bets are off. Everybody cares about fairness at that point. Everybody wants to understand, is someone else being more rewarded than I should be, and so look, there is a plain and simple truth, which is that some kind of a profit share is pretty fundamental to most people. So I've done a lot of work with businesses where we have included, what you might call materiality questions into all colleague surveys, right? So in other words, you've got to provide the list, right? Because people don't know this unless you help them. So here's a list of the kind of benefits that you could get from being an owner. Which of these matter at all? And it's a great opportunity to get people thinking like owners. Second question, clearly no business can afford to do all of these things at once. So we have to make choices. So rank them. Rank your top 2. Which are the ones that you really care about right now, right? It's a fantastic exercise. It gives boards and trust groups decision useful data, which amazingly they lack. I never understand that, right? They're really well-run businesses. They make operational choices informed by decision useful data in every other area of what they do, other than this one. And by the way, an employee engagement survey is not owner data, right? Like it's not the same thing. You might have 1 or 2 questions that are relevant, but it is not the same thing. So, it's a great data point, but what it shows is some fascinating variation, right? And it really depends on company. And by the way, in that list could be things as straightforward as sort of unexpected. So you might have health and well-being, you might have training and development, but you might also have hitting our net zero goals. You might have, the degree to which we commit a percentage of profit to local causes. You might have working with world-class colleagues, because that's a cost, and there's a huge source of learning from that, right? And you might have working on really exciting projects, because that is really, really important in terms of investing in marketing, etc., right? So anyway, you've got to be careful about your list, and then what people value. I work for a trustee for a fantastic organization, architecture firm called Royal Malian, and we did this we've done this for a number of years now, and they have kind of 12 different studios around the world, and you get these fascinating differences, right? So, one of the things is on that list is kind of voice, right? Importance of voice. And voice comes through really loudly from their studios in Madrid. Madrid's highly unionized economy, so maybe that's not surprising, right? Right. Whereas some of the other studios are very clear. They're like, no, we care less about sitting in a room and chatting with each other. What we care about is making, a decent, working on exciting projects and working in a way that generates profit that we share. So, look, it's a brilliant way to do it. You get insights. If you've got your unique points of ownership difference, then you have the means to get that motivational wheel moving, right? Like that, it's the key first step. Mm-hmm. Sorry, long answers. I apologize.
No, right. That's it.
Should I just do the second question, right? Because I said there were 2, right? So the first one is you've got to know the answer to that. The second one is, what are the final mile owner behaviors that the business is expecting? And I am, again, amazed by how few businesses have a specific and granular answer to this question. Like if you were to stop tomorrow and you pointed at a colleague and you went, they've got it. Look at them. The penny's dropped, right? Look at what they're doing. What would they be doing? What are the 1, 2, 3 things that they would be doing differently that makes you go, they're acting like an owner? Because the truth is that's probably different by role type, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a sales role, if you're in a kind of central office, support role, right? If you're on a shop floor, if you're the head of marketing, right? These are different things. If you don't know the answer to that question, how do you know whether it's working? And how are you reassured that it's lined up with your business plan and you're going to see the performance uplift that the data tells us you should be getting from this model? So I don't want to reduce it because there's lots and lots of very specific practice under those 12 headings. But those 2 questions, that's a good place to start as any.
No, I love that sort of clearly sort of identifying it back down to behavior. What is it that people need to do? I mean, That's why, in all companies, you do see this sort of dissonance between the values that they've got written out on the walls and what actually happens, because like one's sort of aligned on intent, the other one's and the question that you just identified, how do you stick it to behavior?
Can I make just one additional point on that one as well? Because I see this all the time, right? Like you cannot instruct anyone to be excited about being an owner, right? Like I see this all the time. I can remember when like my son was much younger. I remember taking him to a theme park for his birthday with a bunch of his friends. It cost me a ton, and he had a miserable time. And I was like, "What is the matter with you? You should be happy. You should be enjoying yourself." My wife's like, "You're an idiot. You're instructing a child to be happy. That's clearly not how that works." It's the same thing, right? You can't tell people to be motivated, like be happy about being an owner. It doesn't work like that. You have to earn it, right? You've got to prove it, and you've got to show people that it's meaningful, that it's real, that those benefits of ownership are tangible, and then hope that it generates that energy. If you instruct it, it ain't going to happen.
Well, how do you, obviously one of the key parts of an EOT to how to demonstrate to that to people is cash, right? Help them, you talked about it earlier, like help them feel that, but there is that sort of with the EOTs predominantly being financed by deferred consideration. Freedom Day, Financial Freedom Day, is 5 to 10 years down the track. I mean, how do you, like when you're introducing an EOT to a company, to the employees on day one, how do you help them to feel those behaviours and help them to feel that change?
So, look, there's a piece that doesn't always happen in the transaction itself, right? So if I'm advising on a transaction, I would typically advise that the financial forecast built to predict, to set the schedule for the deferred consideration repayments, to reassure everybody, trustees, business, that the business can afford, based on sensible assumptions, to meet those deferred consideration payments every year. I would always advise that you build in sufficient headroom that you can start paying some kind of EOT bonus from year one. Even if it feels small and it is simply iconic of what is possible, nonetheless, I think it is such a powerful message to everybody from an early point. So that's point one. Point two, you have to set honest expectations at the point where you're introducing this, right? And I so often, I find myself in the room with teams who are fed up, with boards who, and you track it back. And a lot of it goes back to that announcement, right? It goes back to that announcement day, and people have G'd up the team, and this is fantastic, and you're going to share in this and this and this. And it's great, and you've got to walk this tightrope between being honest about what it is, right? There's a kind of great line I've heard where it's like we're not gifting them, right? Nobody's getting gifted anything, right? And actually, what you're getting is not a company in your name necessarily on day one. You're getting a debt, and you've got to pay. That debt's got to be paid, right? So just recognizing the reality of the transaction, setting really, really clear expectations. You want people to feel positive about change, but you want them not to feel too nervous. So you're trying to walk this tightrope between reassurance, continuity, and excitement. It's very doable. But look, I mean, I went into a business earlier this year. They are 2 years into the model, and I spent time with all of their teams. And every single meeting I had, someone was like, "We were promised £3,500 every year." And I'm in my head, I'm like, I know that you were not promised that, right? I know that someone didn't stand in front of you and say, they will have stood in front of you and said, you could benefit from income tax relief on up to £3,600 each year if the money's available, right? But that is not what has been heard. What has been heard is, we're getting $3,500 every year, and it's not happened. So we were lied to. And it's like, wow, okay. All right. So, you just got to be really helpful and really candid. And look, final point on this, right? So that those are both sort of transaction points. Third point from me, and again, I think too few businesses do this. If you want people to think and act like owners, they have to understand their business, right? And that is not the same as a financial update, right? That's not a performance update. That is making sure that everyone at a base level knows how the business makes money, right? How am I an owner? How are decisions made? What does everybody else do? And how does my business make money? And not everybody's going to get it, and not everybody's going to turn up at that session. But if 1 in 3 do, that's all you need. You only need 1 in 3 people every month, every quarter to be coming up with a little way to nudge something 5% one way or 5% the other way, and it will feed into your bottom line. It is entirely doable. It is worth the effort, but people have got to understand that point, because otherwise they don't believe that, right? If the circle is, hey, look, there's tangible benefits from being an owner, so really throw everything at making this business succeed. If it does, the pot's bigger, the pot gets reinvested in those tangible benefits. If people don't believe that that's true, that it can happen, then it's not going to fire. That's the engine. And so that year one, this is how it works, is a tangible proof point. And you need those early on because they can be hard to come by.
Yeah. So it sounds like a big focus there is obviously education, like setting the right expectations, modeling in that there is some dividends to be able to pay, but then educating people. I mean, what are some beyond that education? I mean, what are some things some tactics that you've seen management teams implement to help people feel that they are having an impact on making that pot bigger so that they can get those tangible benefits?
It's a good question, right? And to me, it comes back to this point about, do you, as a leadership team, and therefore does everyone in your business, know what those final mile behaviors are, right? Because if you don't, then right? So look, when I was running Baxendale's time and materials business, right? It's a management consultancy. Essentially, about a third of what we did was transactions at the point I left. The rest of it was growth, money raising, target operating model stuff, right? And we would hire, great, smart, young people, quite often coming out of Big 4, Big 5 consultancies, right? And they come in, but like within the first half a year, we might have a conversation which sort of says, like, hang on, you had 2 days against you on this task. You've done 4. Why did you do 4? And the answer would be, well, because I was going over and above. We really need to impress this client, and I'm an owner. And it's like, no, that's not the ownership behavior. The ownership behavior is do the same thing to the same quality in a day and a half and build our margins, right? Because that's what we're contributing to. So they weren't wrong. It wasn't a bad thing that they'd done. It was just like, actually, the sharpness is here. So for your business model, you really need to understand what those things are and point them out to people. But again, like I said, you can't instruct, right? So there's a business I know does this really well, where basically the narrative is, we really believe in our owners. To succeed in our sector, we believe you need, these core skill sets. We therefore invest in you having these skill sets. And we hope that you will seize that opportunity. And if you want your business to work so that we can keep doing this and do more of it, these are the things that will help the plan deliver. So it's not an instruction. It's a this is what's in it for you. And that framing is really important.
Yeah, it seems like it's a big change. It's a change in the type of leadership style for a lot of people. Instead of just instead of telling, it's a lot of asking. To sort of in terms of getting them with a Socratic method to come to their own conclusions about what it means to become an owner.
So can I make a point here, right? Because so there is the skepticism about the model is not just in the Google headquarters in Dublin, right? Right. Most rooms, someone will throw a version of that brick, right? And actually quite often internally, there's a version of this brick as well, which is isn't this just running the business well, right? Like, why has this got anything to do with ownership? This like, and let's be really clear on that one, Andy. In an EOT model, the only thing that is guaranteed different is the existence of some trustees. There is nothing done in EOT-owned businesses that you cannot find examples of then in other businesses, right? They have councils, they have elections, they share reward, they listen to voice, right? They share information, right? You can find that everywhere. The point is this: once you put that ownership model in place, it's a lever and it's sat there and everyone can see it. So it is the management team, the leadership, the operating board of the trading company has to choose, are we going to pull that lever? And if we're going to pull it, how hard? And then operationalize it, have a plan. This is what we're going to do. And then you can claim a set of things that you're doing in the name of ownership. But your point about kind of does it motivate people? I mean, I would contend that businesses that are effective businesses are consistently trying to answer that question. What is the thing that helps everyone in my environment, give their best every day? And for sure, that is a leadership challenge, right? And for sure, there are some leadership styles that are probably intuitively better suited to this kind of a model. But it's not going to help if that's a line of attack. Does that make sense, right? Like, I can see people who I work with people who are intuitively not that leadership style, but they can still get actually, okay, I can see how this works, right? And they're not in every room running every conversation. So as long as your middle managers, your team, as long as people understand if the business wants these outcomes, then there are some steps you need to take to get there. If you don't want them, fine, run it how you want, and be as dictatorial as you like, right? But if you want those kind of outcomes, the data tells us that these are the steps that you need to take.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get your perspective of what it's like speaking to some of these, I guess, more aging, baby boomer style founders who are going into looking to transition out of their business, and EO is the option for them. A lot of them had a very traditional, autocratic style, where it's, hey, look, this is just how I've been doing things for 30 years. My team knows how I've been doing things, and look, this is just how it's going to sort of keep running once it's gone. It's always tough to teach an old dog new tricks. What is that process there of helping them to understand the changes they need to make? Because look, in reality, if they don't make the changes, they're probably not going to see the rest of their deferred payments.
So look, it's worth digging into this a little, right? Just forgive me if I dissect your question a little. So it is clearly not always the case that the seller is staying put and carrying on running the business. So there is a whole rabbit hole we can go down around what is the role of the vendor, kind of post an EOT transaction. Are they hanging around? To what degree are they still perceived as being in control? Vendors are typically people, particularly if they're founders, if they've set something up, they're the kind of people that make molecules move differently in the room with the best one in the world. They can be as benign as they like, but teams are just going to respond differently when they're in the room, right? So you need some self-awareness, and actually that can be a really important role for an independent trustee quite often to play, which is to kind of build that relationship and that trust and start to be a kind of critical friend around the vendor, to kind of just make sure that they're not getting in the way of what's possible. But look, lots of vendors stay. And again, that's where I just want to draw a slight distinction again. Just because somebody might be a part of a baby boomer generation doesn't mean that they operate in a certain way. But a second kind of distinction is you can be really autocratic in your leadership style and still fundamentally care about the people around you and your business, right? And so on. And really it's that latter one that I find, right, is the point that makes the difference, right? The real challenge is when you get a vendor who's weirdly transactional about their business, right? They've kind of stacked like punitive interest rates into the transaction. That kind of the whole thing is, sort of like, you need to convince me that this is, that I'm going to come back in and break this if you're not doing it right. So, and that's tricky, right? Because you're not kind of empowering people in that scenario. But in a lot of situations, you have incredibly inspiring leaders, and part of that continuity piece is that they're not leaving straight away, that they are, kind of going to continue to remain a part of the business for a while, and people, are greatly reassured by that. So for me, in that, when you have that style, it's really about ensuring that the space is created and the credibility is shared with whoever is stepping up over a period of time to replace you, and attending to how leadership succession happens in a smart way, right? Really big role for the trustees around that. But again, the biggest factor that is really hard to teach is self-awareness, right? And that's not generationally specific. It's just when you have someone who's really not aware of how they are, that is the toughest situation. And I don't have a magic bullet for that one, I'm afraid, Andy. So yeah.
Well, look, you did allude to something which is, it's not a magic bullet, but it's obviously a pathway to be able to start having those conversations. And that is, in your role as a trustee, it's about building trust with those owners. Because you've got to, you're not in the business, but you still got to be able to have a voice and to be able to contribute and shape how that business is being run. What are some of the ways in which you build trust with those boards and trusts?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I do a lot on this. In addition to being a trustee myself, I do a lot of coaching, a lot of training with trusts and boards, including for the EOA, for the trade body. We do it with my good friend and colleague Sue Lawrence. We do a masterclass, and we really focus in on this, right? Because it's so key. And trust, you put your finger on it, is absolutely the oil, right? It's the grease that helps the governance engine work. And if I had to give you my most simple headline observation, it would be this: really healthy EOT governance needs informal as well as formal contact. It cannot be solely built around turning up 3 times a year, 4 times a year, reading some papers for a meeting, stepping away, right? It has to be based on a relationship that, certainly as an independent trustee, as the outsider, that you would build with the key operational leaders in the business, with the vendor, with the other trustees. And just checking at least once a month is my default, right? At least once a month, I want 30, 45 minutes minimum, one-to-one with the chief exec or the MD. How are things going? What should be on my radar, right? And it's the things like that you're able to raise in that environment which build trust, in the trust that it can be used as a sounding board, that it's a critical friend, that it's not there to beat the board over the head, to reassure the leader of the business that, you expect the board, the operating board of the trading company, to take risk. You know that not everything's going to go their way. You know that at any given point, they are not likely to be on plan, right? And they're going to need to pivot during the year. You know these things, but in a formal meeting, if you've brought, that leader in and you've got a whole group sort of, quizzing them on the state of the business, it doesn't feel like that, right? It's hard to build trust in that situation. Whereas,
I'm sure for a lot of people, it's probably the first time that they've even had independence on their boards.
Quite often, yeah. Look, we do the other thing we do quite, which a lot of people really respond to, is role playing, right? So we just get them to role play scenarios, and they're obviously like hypotheticals, right? Because if you wait for the kind of event to happen, and then people miscue their role, there's friction, right? It's because everybody's the stakes are raised, it's real, it's happening right now. You're suddenly like, oh, we've got to make some people redundant, or someone wants to buy the business, or you role play through some of those things in a safe environment. And if someone missteps, it doesn't matter. You can just be like, well, actually, you do have to bring this to us because this is a reserved matter or a matter for special consent. Like, we have to sign this off. So actually, you do need to. And actually, if you'd raised it informally, 3 months earlier, even if you'd only done that with the independent, it's on the radar. And so kind of that group is managed in its expectations. So that stuff is just doing those practice runs, doing things like inform, consult, approve exercises where you just kind of go through, like, what are the detailed presumptions about the information you're going to share, when you're going to come on the, and it might feel like overkill, but trust me, it is so reassuring because then everybody knows what to expect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Like I said, for a lot of people, a lot of the sort of retiring owners that we're speaking to, their concern is like, what happens next? Right? How does my business continue to run? Like, how do we make decisions? And separating the difference between ownership and management. Right? And I think you sort of highlighted that in that story, exactly how that happens. Right? That delineation happens at that trustee or at that board level, and talks about how you can actually go and get that voice that needs to happen in terms of the owners into those decisions.
Just to add super quick, I mean, look, the two points that maybe are not often made, right? So one is, because particularly for smaller organizations, the creation of a trust board can just feel like, oh yeah, and as you said, kind of sometimes they don't even have a really properly formed operating board, right? It may just be the seller who's the one kind of legal statutory director, right? So there's inevitably some evolution, and it can just be like, I've got 30 people, I've got 50 people, I've got 15 people in my business. We've got a board and a trust. Like, what on earth, right? But look, there's really practical stuff where you just overlay the ownership rhythm on the operating rhythm. It's a complement. And the point I'm making is this should improve the experience of decision making, not impede it. Not have it feel like it's a chore, like it's right. You've got a board that can often feel quite isolated, and actually they've now got a group which, if there's not too much overlap, and they've got they've got at least an independent on there, guiding it. Like, this is a group which is seeking reassurance. It's not aggressively attacking. It will congratulate and applaud publicly when the board is doing well, right? It will. So and the range and breadth of experience supports the quality of decision making, right? So that's the first point, right? Is it should be a benefit if done right. The second is, please to God, make it fun. Like, find some fun, and I don't mean that lightly, but right, governance does not scream fun. I get it, and this is not about taking yourself seriously. Of course, take the role seriously. Of course, right, you're doing a really important function, and you need an audit trail and all of that stuff, but you kind of need to go where the energy is and get some people who like trying to understand how business works and how it can succeed and how decisions are made and digging into this stuff. And every business has those geeks, right? They will be there. Just find them and tap them, right? And try to make it fun, because that infection is what will kind of push out to everybody else as well. Just too often, EOT governance, people kind of go, oh, you can see their shoulders sink, right? The minute it comes up, and just trying to kind of say, look, this should be the fun stuff. But I accept I am a geek. I'm a geek, so self-confessed. So maybe I'm just unnatural.
No, like, governance is rarely a sexy topic until people understand how, like, what type of impact it can have. And like, that's sort of lit a fire under you. And look, I think that. Doing the whole process of sort of this EOT governance model, like in the UK, but even employee ownership, that lights a fire under more people. And if you do the education well, it helps them how to contribute more to the business. And I think it's an amazing thing. So, mate, before I do want to say, before we go into the fast round, we've been very focused on transactions in companies, but you've done a lot of amazing work to be able to better inform policy, like better inform the actual EO movement in the UK. And you talked about it's been on a massive change of trajectory ever since they introduced the EOT. And that sort of turned into that hockey stick growth since about 2020. But I mean, what do you see as some of the sort of challenges and opportunities ahead for employee ownership in the UK?
The opportunity is the obvious one, right? Which is that we have seen a mainstreaming of EOTs as a succession route. This is a narrative you're super familiar with yourself, Andy, right? That, we know there's going to be, just tens of thousands of business owners looking to exit and make a sale, ideally over the next 5-10 years. Just a genuinely significant chunk, particularly of the SME, the small business economy in the UK. It's a huge opportunity, therefore. And look, we live in a world where, I would contend there are kind of two global crises, right? Climate change and inequality. And some of the stuff you see happening in the UK, some of the unrest, the public unrest and so on, I feel like these are like the extreme weather events of that inequality crisis, right? And there are not that many really, kind of tangible levers that government at a local level, at a national level can pull to try to address inequality. And this is one of them, right? Like, this is a way to really broaden and equalize out return on excellence and achievement in businesses. That is powerful to me, right? That's incredibly powerful. So should we be doing more of it? Absolutely. Is there an opportunity with the EOT? Yes. We've got great supply side energy advisors promoting that and so on. Department for Business and Trade, we know, are interested, right? They're committed to produce some kind of a strategy. There's a manifesto commitment for this government on doubling the size of the mutuals economy. So not just worker ownership, but broader than that. So we're talking to them about some really interesting things. I give you one quick example. The US has some great examples of their sort of equivalent, so ESOPs, buying ESOPs, right? Or buying other companies and becoming groups. So you have a group ESOP, right? And what a fantastic way, right? Of course, beyond organic growth, you can grow by acquisition. We all know that, right? Well, right now, if you're an EOT-owned business and you want to acquire another company, you can do it. But that seller they miss the opportunity of the CGT relief, right? If they were selling separately to a trust, right? And then you have two trust businesses, and that becomes a much harder thing. So we're trying to say, look, well, if an EOT at the point where it acquires a business was able to give that vendor at least some of that CGT relief, right, equivalent, then you're going to start growing existing EOT-owned businesses at a faster rate, and that's going to drive, and you're going to hit that manifesto commitment and so on. So that could be really exciting. There's great data precedent from the US. It's kind of like, okay, that's really interesting. So I do think there's some exciting opportunities around that. I think some lessons from the Canadian EOT model, where they deliberately kind of blended the UK EOT with the trust, but also with some direct ownership elements and so on. I think there's some opportunity around that. I think we could evolve, our EOT model to include some element of that. So look, some really exciting stuff there that is possible in terms of driving growth. So that's kind of point one. And I'm going to add to that, right? Given the time of year, right? We're recording this before the budget. The budget may have happened by the time this goes out. So goodness knows whether those tax reliefs even still exist, right? So then that is kind of really key to my second point. Our knowledge program 2 years ago showed some absolutely powerful impacts. You aggregate those impacts up to the level of impact on the national economy, and you could see significant, kind of punching above our weight as a very small sector in terms of productivity, in terms of GDP contribution, and so on, right? So we should be something that is absolutely favored and promoted. But go back to what you and I have been talking about, right? And this is the big challenge I believe our sector faces right now. Unless we are helping all of these hundreds of businesses that are moving into this model every year understand how to switch on those impacts, there's a risk we do another knowledge program in 2 years' time and we see those impacts start to drop away. And you and I know this, right? We're having conversations with businesses who are in this model and saying, oh, it's great. Some of them, it's great, but it's not quite firing, right? And that best practice, those insights, they're out there. So we have fantastic census data now, right? Great work by the White Rose Center, the two Andrews, the EOA to really, kind of hold and update that census data. How many have we got? What are they? What types are they? And so on. And more than that, it's richer than that, right? We've got this fantastic impact data set, which we are going to need to kind of update, and finding ways to do that is really important, right? But there is a third set of data, and it's that one. It's management insight. How do you run EO businesses to make sure you get those impacts? And we are kind of where we've been historically on those other two data types, right? We've got great anecdote, we've got great case studies. You can turn up at events and hear companies say, this is how we did it. But we haven't really fused all of that into a kind of common curriculum, something super simple. And the framework I mentioned earlier starts to do that. If you find a handful of us who are sort of deep in this stuff, and we probably share some of that stuff, we've got good practice to hand. But how we make that really, really accessible, gather it so that it's kind of held in a place that is, easy to access and learn from, that's a challenge, right? And we need to be able to do that to make sure that we're keeping those impact levels high, because it will feed what policymakers see, what they do, how much time and effort they focus on promoting the model with us.
Very cool. Well, thank you. Did not disappoint with the hope and also challenges. Now, mate, before we go, I'd love to ask you just those 3 quick questions that I ask everyone, and you just offer a quick response. Does that sound all right?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Okay, so who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
So I that's a horrible question. Like, obviously, just to say up front, like, goes without saying, right? Because, I've worked with lots and lots of leaders and many, many amazing people. So whatever my answer is going to grotesquely, offend some people probably, right? Because I'm going to leave some people out. But so just to try to, I work with amazing people. So James Levine, who runs EOA at the moment, is incredible. My colleague Chris Budd, Christian Wilson, amazing people. You've interviewed these guys, right? Like, how dynamic and impressive they are. Sue Lawrence, Adam Campbell, they're just fantastic people, really kind of buried in this stuff and share that same passion and this mission to kind of raise performance. And look, you've got the kind of research gods in this space, right? Like Joseph Blasi, like I said, Doug Cruz, Graham Nuttall, of course, right? So, these people are just absolutely wonderful. Got to mention Ann Tyler, who chairs ownership at work, just fantastic, right? But if I had to pick one, it's got to be Deb Oxley. Deb, I've known Deb for a long time. She's an incredible woman. I know you've interviewed her too. She's just a force of nature. She lives and breathes this. She ran the EOA for a number of years. She really kind of saw it through that fantastic hockey stick, kicking off growth. She drove and created and led the ownership dividend, which was the first big chunky bit of research that really started to kind of demonstrate impact. She's been a trustee at Ownership at Work and been really powerful and supportive and getting the knowledge program going. If you scratch at the surface, you just find her behind so many of the things that have really got this sector in the UK to where it is today. And frankly, she's also just a fundamentally lovely, values-driven person. And you sit and listen to her talk about employee ownership, and it just seems like the most natural, obvious thing in the world. And why haven't you been doing it for longer? So I'm a Deb fanboy. So right here, yeah.
Well, that makes 2 of us. And we'll have a link to that episode in the show notes. Second question: what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
My favorite resource, good question. I'm sort of not kissing your ass, Andy, but like these are great, right? Like I have dug in and listened to your podcast. You can tell, right? They're fantastic. There's fantastic stuff on the EOA's website. I had to sort of express a conflict there because they've got a lot of the research that we produce from ownership work on there. So I'm not sort of singing, my praises on that. Obviously, kind of White Rose is a fantastic center. Kellogg Center, the Center for Mutual Co-owned Businesses at Kellogg, they have fantastic data there. So yeah, those are great. What I would say though, I'm almost inclined to say, at the expense of all of us, that last point we made, right? Like I feel the resource that we need right now doesn't exist yet today. The thing that is the super, like what's the core curriculum, and then how do I go find best practice super easily, right? Not just one company telling me like just these are the 10 things I can do. Here's the five key things that you can do differently that will make this work, at a baseline level. I feel like that resource is still to come. And I welcome anyone who wants to kind of be part of building it. So yeah.
Awesome. And then finally, what would you say to a business owner who's sitting on the fence regarding a transition to an employee-owned model?
Make sure that you talk to people who have done this. The reason I say that, and I'm not just sort of gung-ho, like get on with it, do it, it's not right, but the truth is it isn't right for everybody. Right? It's an incredible thing and it's a powerful thing, but you should not be doing it just because there's a CGT relief, right? And if you really want to see those impacts that this model can generate, then you have to have understood it. And look, I say this, some of those people that I mentioned, they've all run their own businesses in the model or sold their own business. I've run, Accidental's a employee-owned business, 100% employee-owned business, right? So if you've run your own EO business, if you've helped others, if you've worked with dozens of others, you know this intuitively that it is right for some and not for all, and it may just not be right for you now, right? But look, you can do the transaction whenever you want. You just need to have your head up and get good advice and talk to people who've done it. Because it's the thing that makes the difference. Okay,
awesome. Campbell, this has been fantastic. We could have kept talking for days. Like if we didn't really touch on much free transaction, like we said we were going to, but it's just been an amazing topic. And obviously your passion, excitement, and deep knowledge about the space was clearly obvious to everyone listening. But Campbell, where can people go if they want to follow your story and learn more about your work?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a very silly Scottish sounding name without even the good grace to be Scottish. So, Campbell McDonald on LinkedIn is, I think there's only one of us. You can go to Eternal Business. It's easy to find again. There's only one, so you'll find me on there. That's the easiest way to get in touch. One of those two routes. I just want to say thank you, Andy. By the way, what you're doing in this space, I think, is fantastic. It's remarkable, right? No one else has done this in this way. I think you're creating a resource which everyone can benefit. And I know that you want to promote this model as well, and so on. I'm not, we're all in that same space, but you're one of this tribe, I'm afraid, if you don't know it. And I just want to congratulate you for what you're doing, because I think it's quite something.
Well, mate, thank you very much for your kind words. And look, I think for me, it goes back to those things that go back to that first question, like why is EO important for you? And I do see that as very much like this is the rising tide that can lift all boats. And I think the example that you guys are taking in the UK about sort of creating a model and creating a service, an ecosystem of service providers and creating these positive stories just makes it easy for everyone else around the world. So Thank you again. And Campbell, thank you so much for your time, your energy. This has been an amazing podcast, and we look forward to having you again at some time to talk about the pre-transaction stuff.
It'd be my privilege. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Campbell.